Have you ever wondered if a few simple words could completely change the way a man responds to your texts? Most people assume that attraction depends on appearance, chemistry, or luck. Others believe it comes from writing the perfect message, choosing the right emoji, or replying at exactly the right time. But what if the biggest difference has nothing to do with any of those things? What if the real shift comes from understanding a few simple phrases that naturally spark curiosity and emotional investment? While many women spend hours rewriting messages, analyzing response times, and searching for hidden meanings behind every text, they often overlook the psychological patterns that influence how interest develops. The truth is that attraction is not built only through constant communication. It often grows through curiosity, anticipation, and the feeling that someone is genuinely worth getting to know. This is not about manipulating anyone or pretending to be someone you are not. It is about understanding how interest naturally develops and why certain conversations leave a stronger impression than others. Once you understand these principles, texting becomes less about guessing and more about creating meaningful interactions that encourage genuine connection. Instead of constantly wondering where you stand, you begin communicating with more confidence, patience, and emotional awareness. In this video, we will explore 6 simple words that can completely change the tone of your conversations when they are used naturally and at the right moment. These words are not magic, nor are they secret tricks that force someone to like you. Their power comes from how they activate curiosity, emotional engagement, and the desire to keep the conversation moving forward. Psychological research has long shown that people become more invested in experiences they actively participate in rather than those simply handed to them. The same idea often applies to attraction. When someone feels invited to discover more about you instead of having everything explained immediately, their attention tends to stay engaged much longer. Rather than creating pressure or chasing constant reassurance, these words encourage a healthier balance where interest has room to grow naturally. Before revealing the first 2 words, however, it is important to understand why they work. Without understanding the psychology behind them, many people either overuse them or introduce them at the wrong time, reducing their impact completely. One of the biggest misunderstandings in modern dating is assuming that men experience attraction exactly the same way women often do. While every individual is different, many men initially respond more strongly to curiosity, challenge, and discovery than to immediate emotional depth. That does not mean they cannot build deep emotional intimacy. It simply means that emotional connection often develops after genuine interest has already been established. Many women unknowingly remove that sense of curiosity by sharing everything too quickly, constantly initiating conversations, or trying to create closeness before attraction has had enough time to grow on its own. In doing so, they unintentionally answer questions he has not yet had the opportunity to ask. When mystery disappears too early, so does much of the excitement that naturally fuels pursuit. Healthy attraction often grows through a gradual process of learning about one another rather than receiving every answer immediately. Understanding this difference allows you to communicate in a way that feels effortless instead of exhausting. Rather than trying to convince someone to like you, you create an environment where curiosity encourages them to invest willingly in getting to know you better. I'm talking about understanding a principle of male psychology so powerful that once you truly recognize it, you'll wonder how you ever dated without knowing it. Most dating advice encourages you to be authentic, communicate honestly, and focus on building an emotional connection. Those ideas absolutely matter, but they usually come later. They skip over the first stage that often determines whether attraction keeps growing or quietly fades away. Before a man begins falling for your personality, something else usually has to happen first. His natural desire to pursue needs to be activated, and that response is often influenced by a few psychological triggers that many women unknowingly cancel out through the way they text. In today's video, I'm going to share 6 simple words that, when used naturally and at the right moment, can create a surprisingly strong pull in his mind. These aren't random phrases or clever pickup lines. They are based on long-standing psychological principles about attraction, curiosity, and emotional investment. When those words arrive at exactly the right time, something interesting begins to happen. His mind starts associating you with curiosity, anticipation, and emotional reward. Instead of blending in with everyone else in his contacts, you become the woman who stands out. You become someone he wants to understand better, someone who feels intriguing, and someone who naturally occupies more of his attention. There is one important warning, though. These words are only effective when they are used in the right timing and in the right context. Used too early, too often, or without understanding why they work, they can lose their impact completely. That's why learning the psychology behind them is every bit as important as learning the words themselves. Once you understand how attraction develops inside your mind, stop obsessing over new signals or trying to decode every text message. Instead, you begin recognizing what encourages genuine interest and what quietly pushes it away. Rather than chasing his attention, you create the conditions that inspire him to move forward on his own. So, if you've ever felt like you're always the one starting a conversation, wondering whether he truly likes you, or questioning why his enthusiasm suddenly faded just when everything seemed to go well, stay with him. What you're about to learn is something many women never discover. The answer isn't becoming more available, more accommodating, or more eager to prove yourself. The real difference comes from understanding which psychological triggers naturally awaken his desire to invest. Once you know what they are, your conversations begin to feel completely different. Before we reveal the first two words that can shift the entire dynamic in your favor, there's something you need to understand about how many men experience attraction through texting. If you communicate with him exactly the way you would personally like someone to communicate with you, there's a good chance you're missing how his mind processes early attraction. It's almost like speaking two different emotional languages. And this misunderstanding is where many promising connections lose momentum before either person realizes what's happening. Here's something that often gets overlooked. For many men, attraction doesn't begin with emotional closeness. It often starts with curiosity, mystery, and the satisfaction of gradually earning someone's attention. When many women text from a place of immediate openness and constant emotional sharing, they unintentionally remove the very uncertainty that fuels his natural desire to pursue. His brain is naturally drawn toward discovering, exploring, and gradually uncovering something that feels valuable, rather than receiving every answer all at once. Think of it this way. Human beings naturally place greater value on things they have invested effort into earning. That's not manipulation. It's simply how the brain's reward system operates. In romantic situations, many men experience this even more strongly because pursuit itself creates anticipation and emotional investment. When you become available too quickly, explain everything immediately, or reveal too much before curiosity has had time to grow, you unintentionally communicate that there is very little left to discover. That's exactly why the 6 words you're about to learn can be so effective. They do much more than deliver a message. They create what psychologists describe as cognitive tension, a feeling of curiosity that encourages his mind to stay engaged, ask questions, and continue thinking about you long after the conversation ends. These words spark several reactions at the same time. They awaken curiosity, create a touch of uncertainty, and stir emotional interest all at once. When the brain encounters a message that creates this kind of mental tension, it naturally becomes motivated to resolve it. Psychologists often associate this process with dopamine, a neurotransmitter linked to motivation, anticipation, and reward. Suddenly, discovering the answer feels important, and the easiest way to satisfy that curiosity is by continuing the conversation with you. What makes this approach especially powerful is that it does more than spark curiosity. It subtly positions you as someone who has an interesting perspective, someone who notices things other people overlook. Instead of appearing completely completely predictable, you become someone worth understanding. In his mind, you represent a new experience, a fresh conversation, and someone who might reveal something unexpected. That feeling of discovery naturally captures attention and encourages deeper engagement. One of the biggest mistakes many women make is trying to create attraction by becoming familiar too quickly. They immediately share every detail about their day, ask routine questions about work, and focus entirely on creating comfort. While emotional connection is important, curiosity often comes before comfort during the early stages of attraction. When everything becomes predictable too soon, the excitement of discovery begins to disappear. Without that sense of anticipation, the desire to pursue often loses momentum. That is exactly why these 6 words can feel so effective. They create connection without revealing everything at once. They encourage conversation while leaving room for imagination. Most importantly, they allow you to remain intriguing instead of becoming someone who is constantly seeking attention. Rather than chasing his interest, you naturally invite it. Now that you understand the psychology behind this approach, let's move to the next 2 words that can immediately change the dynamic between you. The third and fourth words are surprisingly simple. I bet. At first glance, those words may seem almost too ordinary to matter, but their psychological effect is much stronger than most people realize. Saying "I bet" isn't simply making a statement. It introduces a playful prediction, and predictions naturally invite people to respond. When you text something like, "I bet you're the kind of person who," or "I bet you've never," his mind immediately starts evaluating whether your assumption is true. Instead of passively reading your message, he becomes mentally involved. He begins thinking about how to answer, whether to agree, disagree, or surprise you with something unexpected. Without realizing it, he's already investing more attention in the conversation. Imagine sending a message like, "I bet you're actually terrible at cooking, but everyone still believes you're amazing." Or perhaps, "I bet you have a hidden talent that almost nobody knows about." Notice the difference. You're not interviewing him with direct questions. Instead, you're making a playful observation that naturally encourages him to reveal something about himself. Whether he corrects you or confirms your guess, the conversation immediately becomes more engaging. This works because people naturally feel motivated to respond when someone forms an opinion about them, especially if that opinion comes from someone whose attention they value. If your prediction highlights an interesting quality, many people instinctively want to either prove you right or show you an even more interesting version of themselves. Either response increases emotional investment because they are now actively participating instead of simply answering questions. The real strength of the phrase "I bet" goes beyond curiosity. It subtly communicates confidence. It suggests that you're observant, perceptive, and comfortable making light-hearted assumptions about people. Instead of appearing uncertain or constantly seeking approval, you come across as someone who notices details others often miss. That sense of confidence and playful intuition is naturally attractive because it makes the interaction feel fresh, engaging, and memorable. The real power comes from how you use these predictions. They should be specific enough to show you've been paying attention, yet open-ended enough to invite him to surprise you. Focus on qualities that are interesting, positive, or unexpected instead of making negative assumptions. The objective isn't to challenge him or put him on the defensive. It's to encourage him to reveal more of his personality in a playful and natural way. Timing also makes a huge difference. The phrase "I bet" works best after you've already built a little comfort with each other, but want to move beyond surface-level conversation. It allows you to explore his personality without becoming overly serious or emotionally vulnerable too soon. Rather than seeking approval or trying to force a connection, you're simply sharing a confident observation based on what you've noticed. That relaxed confidence is often far more attractive than trying too hard to impress someone. Now let's go back to the first 2 words that completely change how he experiences your messages. I'm curious. At first, they seem almost too ordinary to matter, but these 2 words quietly shift the entire dynamic of the conversation. When you say, "I'm curious," You're no longer answering questions or trying to keep the conversation alive. Instead, you become the one leading the interaction. You're observing, exploring, and inviting him to reveal more about himself. Many people are held captive by the reassurance. They ask about his day, explain what they're doing, or keep conversations focused on familiar topics. But when you begin with "I'm curious," you immediately introduce a different energy. Instead of chasing his attention, you're showing genuine interest in understanding something unique about him. That subtle shift naturally encourages him to become more engaged because he now feels like the person being discovered rather than the person simply receiving information. For example, instead of sending, "How was your day?" you could say, "I'm curious what you're like when you're doing something you genuinely enjoy." Rather than asking, "What are you doing tonight?" you might write, "I'm curious if you're someone who plans everything or prefers to be spontaneous." Notice how different those conversations feel. One simply gathers information, the other encourages reflection and reveals personality. Psychologically, this works because thoughtful questions invite introspection. When someone realizes you're genuinely curious about who they are instead of just making small talk, they naturally spend more time thinking about their answer. They begin reflecting on themselves, considering the impression they want to leave, and deciding what they want you to know about them. That mental engagement creates emotional investment because they're actively participating in the conversation instead of responding automatically. The secret isn't simply using the words "I'm curious." It's choosing subjects that invite meaningful reflection. Ask about the qualities, values, experiences, or habits that reveal who he is beneath everyday conversation. Those kinds of questions encourage richer discussions and help you stand out from people who stay focused on routine topics. Timing matters here as well. These words work best after you've already exchanged a few enjoyable conversations and want to deepen the interaction without sounding overly intense or intrusive. "I'm curious" gives you permission to ask more thoughtful questions while maintaining a relaxed, confident tone. You're not seeking reassurance or trying to impress him. You're simply interested in learning something genuine about the person you're talking to. But these first two words are only the beginning. They spark curiosity and change the direction of the conversation. The next pair of words builds on that curiosity and encourages even greater emotional investment. Once someone begins wanting to share more of themselves and leave a lasting impression, the conversation naturally becomes more engaging, and when all 6 words are used thoughtfully and at the right moments, they create a communication style that feels confident, playful, and memorable without ever feeling forced. For example, you could send a message like, "I'm curious about something. I bet you're the kind of person who would surprise me if I asked you to plan the most unexpected date imaginable. Would you?" It seems simple, but that one message accomplishes several things at once. It expresses genuine curiosity about his personality, gently challenges his creativity, suggests that you appreciate originality, and invites him to imagine a fun possibility. Rather than keeping him on the spot, it encourages him to picture himself creating an experience that will impress you. What happens in his mind after reading a message like this is surprisingly interesting. First, your curiosity captures his attention. Then he starts wondering whether your description of him is accurate. Finally, his imagination takes over as he begins thinking about the kind of date he could create and how you might react. Before he has even typed a reply, he's already mentally participating in the experience. That emotional investment is what makes the conversation instead of ordinary. The real strength of these 6 words is how naturally they work together. "I'm curious" positions you as someone who enjoys discovering people. "I bet" communicates confidence and playfulness. "Would you" invites participation without sounding demanding. Together, they create an interaction that feels engaging, light-hearted, and intriguing. Instead of chasing his attention through constant conversation, you encourage him to invest his own imagination and curiosity. That subtle shift often creates far more interest than asking direct questions or sharing everything about yourself immediately. However, learning the words is only part of the process. Knowing when to use them is just as important. Even the strongest communication techniques lose their effect if the timing is wrong or if they're used too often. Before you start experimenting with these phrases, it's important to avoid a few common texting habits that can quietly reduce attraction without you even realizing it. The first mistake is something we can call emotional overload. This happens when every message becomes a long explanation about your feelings, your day, or the state of the relationship. While openness is valuable in healthy relationships, sending large amounts of emotional information too early can sometimes overwhelm the conversation instead of strengthening it. Rather than creating curiosity, it can make the interaction feel heavier than necessary. Giving conversations room to breathe often creates a much more natural rhythm. Another common mistake is becoming completely predictable. If every morning begins with the same text, every reply arrives within exactly the same amount of time, and every conversation follows an identical routine, the interaction gradually loses its sense of anticipation. Consistency is healthy, but predictability can sometimes reduce excitement. A little natural variation keeps conversations feeling fresh and prevents them from becoming automatic. There's also the habit of turning every conversation into an interview. Questions like, "How was work?" "What are you doing tonight?" or "How's your week going?" are perfectly fine occasionally, but relying on them alone rarely creates memorable conversations. When every exchange feels like a checklist of questions and answers, emotional engagement begins to fade. Conversations become much more interesting when they're built around curiosity, playful observations, shared experiences, and thoughtful discussion instead of endless information gathering. Another mistake many people overlook is using the same phrases too frequently. Even effective communication loses its impact through repetition. If every conversation begins with "I'm curious" or "I bet," those words quickly become ordinary. Their influence comes from thoughtful timing, not constant repetition. Used occasionally, they stand out. Used constantly, they become background noise. Perhaps the biggest mistake of all is never allowing enough space for anticipation to develop. Healthy attraction isn't built through non-stop communication. It also grows through moments when both people have the opportunity to reflect, wonder, and look forward to the next conversation. When every silence is immediately filled, there's little room for curiosity or emotional anticipation to naturally grow. Sometimes the conversations that leave the strongest impression are the ones that end while both people are still looking forward to continuing them. If you're constantly available, replying instantly every time and always ready to continue the conversation, you remove one of the strongest forces that keeps attraction alive: anticipation. Human beings naturally value experiences they cannot access whenever they want. When someone knows you will always respond immediately, always be interested, and always make yourself available, there is very little left to anticipate or appreciate. Healthy attraction often grows when both people have space to think about each other between conversations instead of remaining in constant contact. Understanding these common mistakes is just as valuable as learning the right words to say. Attraction isn't influenced only by the things that create interest. It's also shaped by the habits that quietly reduce it over time. When you combine thoughtful communication with an awareness of these common pitfalls, your conversations become much more engaging, balanced, and memorable. Instead of feeling like you're constantly trying to earn someone's attention, you naturally create interactions that encourage genuine interest from both sides. There is, however, one more important piece of the puzzle. Knowing the right words and avoiding common mistakes can help create attraction, but keeping a relationship emotionally engaging over time requires something even deeper. Long-term connection is built through curiosity, mutual respect, emotional safety, and a willingness for both people to continue discovering each other. Initial excitement may open the door, but lasting attraction grows through consistent effort and shared experiences. One of the biggest misunderstandings about relationships is the belief that people lose interest simply because they become bored with another person. In reality, lasting relationships continue to evolve because both individuals keep growing, learning, and revealing new parts of themselves over time. Curiosity doesn't have to disappear after the first few conversations. When both partners remain interested in each other's goals, experiences, ideas, and personal growth, the relationship continues feeling fresh and meaningful. If you'd like to experiment with these ideas, choose one approach that feels genuine to your personality rather than trying to use everything at once. Perhaps begin by expressing curiosity about something you've noticed. Maybe make a playful observation with, "I bet," or invite him into a fun conversation that reflects his interests. Then simply pay attention to how the interaction develops. Notice whether the conversation becomes more engaging, whether he shares more about himself, or whether the exchange feels more natural and enjoyable for both of you. Most importantly, notice how you feel while communicating this way. Instead of texting from a place of uncertainty or constantly looking for reassurance, focus on expressing authentic curiosity and confidence. Healthy communication isn't about convincing someone to like you. It's about creating conversations where both people feel interested, respected, and excited to keep learning about each other. People who develop strong dating experiences usually make one important shift. They stop obsessing over decoding every message and instead pay attention to whether interest and effort are being exchanged naturally. They become less focused on chasing clarity and more focused on recognizing genuine compatibility. As a result, they spend less time overthinking mixed signals and more time investing in connections where interest flows in both directions.